You're nothing but a thief! Get out before I call the cops! The manager's voice roared through the gleaming showroom of Lux Motors, sharp as a blade slicing through the polished air. His face was a mask of rage, veins pulsing in his neck. As he jabbed a finger at a black woman in worn jeans and a faded hoodie. "People like you don't belong here." The words echoed off the marble floors, stunning customers into silence, their coffee cups frozen mid-sip. Salespeople stood like statues, eyes wide, as the woman, calm, unshaken, met his glare with a gaze so steady it sent chills down the spine. Before we dive into the story, where are you watching from? Have you ever been dismissed or made to feel like you didn't belong, just because of how you looked? If you've ever stayed silent and let your actions speak, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe as we step into what really happened. This wasn't just any showdown in a luxury car dealership. This was the spark of a reckoning, one that would unravel careers, expose hidden truths, and redefine what it means to judge a person by their character. The woman at the center of this storm was Ava Reynolds, a 45-year-old titan who had clawed her way from the gritty streets of Oakland, California, to the pinnacle of the automotive world. Ava was the CEO of Reynolds Automotive Empire, a powerhouse with 15 luxury car dealerships across California, each one a testament to her relentless drive. But on this day, at Lux Motors in Malibu, she wasn't the polished executive in a bespoke suit. She was a ghost from her own past, dressed in a faded hoodie, worn jeans, and driving a 2014 Chevy Malibu, a deliberate disguise to test the heart of her newest acquisition. Ava's story began in a place far removed from the crystal chandeliers and sleek Porsches of Lux Motors. Born in Oakland's toughest neighborhood, she grew up in a world where every glance seemed to size her up, where every door felt half closed before she even knocked. As a child, she'd walk past car lots, dreaming of the gleaming vehicles behind the glass, only to be shooed away by salespeople who assumed she was trouble. Those moments burned into her soul, not as scars, but as fuel. By 18, she was working in her uncle's auto shop, learning the trade, absorbing every detail about engines, deals, and dreams. By 30, she'd opened her first dealership. By 45, she was a legend, a self-made millionaire who turned rejection into an empire. Lux Motors, her latest acquisition, sat on Malibu's elite coastal strip, a haven for wealthy buyers. Its showroom gleamed with marble floors and chandeliers, showcasing Porsches, Maseratis, and Aston Martins like prized art. But whispers had reached Ava's ears, quiet complaints from former customers that twisted her stomach. Stories of being judged by their clothes, their accents, their skin. Not loud outcries, but subtle hints of a rot festering in the culture of her newest dealership. She couldn't ignore it. Her empire was built on integrity, on the belief that every customer deserved respect, no matter who they were. If these whispers were true, they threatened everything she stood for. Ava didn't trust corporate audits. She wanted the raw truth. So, she devised a bold plan: go undercover in her own dealership. The stakes were high. Discrimination could spark lawsuits and tarnish her brand. More than that, it was personal. She needed to know if her employees were betraying her values. To pull it off, Ava stripped away the trappings of her success. She dug through her closet, pulling out clothes she hadn't touched in years, a pair of jeans with frayed knees, sneakers scuffed from long-forgotten walks, and a hoodie that smelled faintly of her old apartment. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Not the CEO who commanded boardrooms, but a woman who could have been anyone. Someone the world might overlook. The final touch was her car. Instead of her sleek Mercedes S-Class or her vintage Corvette, she chose the Chevy Malibu, a reliable but unremarkable sedan that screamed ordinary in a place where six-figure price tags were the norm. It was perfect. If her employees were judging customers by appearances, this disguise would expose them. Ava parked her Chevy Malibu at Lux Motors, her heart racing with anticipation. The glass doors gleamed under the California sun, hiding the truth about her dealership. She adjusted her hoodie, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Ava stepped into Lux Motors' opulent showroom, where polished cars gleamed under chandeliers. But she felt invisible. Salespeople in crisp suits ignored her, tending to other customers with smiles and sparkling water. For 4 minutes. Her presence went unacknowledged, a silent slight that stung. Finally, she approached the reception desk, where Chloe Bennett sat, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her nails clicking on a keyboard. Chloe was 26, ambitious, with dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. But her eyes held a sharpness that Ava recognized, a hunger to prove herself in a cutthroat world. Chloe glanced up, her gaze sweeping over Ava's hoodie and jeans, and her lips curled into a faint, dismissive smirk. "If you're here for a job, applications are online," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, as if Ava couldn't possibly be a customer. No greeting, no warmth, just an assumption that cut deeper than words. Ava kept her composure, her years of navigating boardrooms and biases steadying her. "I'm here to look at cars," she said, her tone polite but firm. Chloe's eyes narrowed, scanning Ava again, as if searching for a reason to believe her. "Our cheapest car starts at 50 grand, she said, leaning back in her chair. "You might want to try the used lot in Santa Ana." The words were laced with a patronizing sweetness, designed to make Ava feel small, out of place, like a child who'd wandered into the wrong store, before Ava could respond. Caleb Morgan approached, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. At 40, Caleb carried himself with the swagger of a man who thought he owned the room. His suit was tailored, his hair slicked back, but there was a brittleness to his confidence, a need to assert control. Ava had hired him for his sales record, not knowing the arrogance that came with it. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his smile thin, his eyes cold. He didn't introduce himself or offer help. Instead, he stood over Ava, arms crossed, as if her presence was an inconvenience. "I'd like to see your luxury sedans," Ava said, her voice steady, giving him a chance to do his job. But Caleb's smile widened, a predator sensing weakness. "Those are for serious buyers," he said, emphasizing serious like a jab. "We'll need pre-approved financing and ID before we can proceed." His tone made it clear. He didn't believe Ava belonged, didn't think she could afford to breathe the same air as his real customers. The showroom hummed with activity, but Ava felt the weight of every glance, or lack thereof. A couple in designer clothes was being fawned over by a salesperson, offered a test drive without a single question about their finances. The contrast was stark, and it wasn't just about her clothes. Ava knew the unspoken truth. Her skin, her presence, marked her as other in this space. She glanced at the Porsche 911 across the room, its curves gleaming under the lights, and felt a pang, not for the car, but for the dream it represented, a dream she'd fought to make real for herself and others. Then, a new customer walked in, a young black woman in a sharp blazer, her confidence radiating. Nia Carter, a 32-year-old lawyer who'd earned her place in the world, approached the desk with a smile. Ava watched, her heart sinking, as Chloe repeated the same cold routine. Dismissing Nia with a suggestion to try somewhere else, Caleb hovered nearby, his fake smile ready, and Ava realized this wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern, a culture, a betrayal of everything her empire stood for. Ava's hands tightened into fists, not from anger, but from resolve. She stepped back, her phone already recording. capturing every word, every gesture. She wasn't just a customer anymore. She was a witness, a judge, and soon, the one who would bring this house of cards crashing down. But for now, she let Caleb's words linger in the air, let the showroom's polished facade hide the ugliness beneath. The test had just begun, and her employees had no idea who they were failing. Ava stood in Lux Motors, her faded hoodie clashing with the showroom's wealth. A chill of dismissal cut through, sharper than the air conditioning. Ava's phone, tucked in her pocket, was recording every moment, every slight, every word that would soon become evidence. She wasn't just a customer, she was a witness to a betrayal that cut deeper than she'd feared. Caleb Morgan, the manager with the slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, stood a few feet away, his arms still crossed, his posture radiating control. He thought he'd won this round, that his sharp words had put Ava in her place. "Ma'am, if you're just browsing, maybe this isn't the right place for you," he said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. The ma'am was a weapon, patronizing, meant to belittle. Ava caught the glance he shot toward Chloe Bennett, the receptionist, who smirked from behind her desk, her perfectly manicured nails pausing on the keyboard. It was a silent agreement between them. This woman didn't belong. Ava's heart thudded, not with fear, but with a growing fire. She'd faced this before, decades ago, as a teenager dreaming of cars she couldn't touch, as a young entrepreneur pitching to investors who saw her skin before her business plan. Each time, she'd turned pain into power, but standing here, in her own dealership, the sting was fresh. She forced herself to stay calm, her face a mask of polite curiosity. "I'm interested in the Porsche 911 over there," she said, nodding toward the sleek black car, its curves catching the light like a promise. "Can you tell me about it?" Caleb's eyes narrowed, his smile tightening. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. But his words were loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "That's $120,000. Ma'am, we don't do casual walk-ins for cars like that. You'll need to show pre-approved financing and ID, 3 forms. Actually," his tone was a challenge, daring her to prove she belonged. Ava noticed a couple in designer suits glance over, their curiosity tinged with amusement, as if this were a show for their entertainment. The humiliation was deliberate, public, designed to push her out the door. She didn't flinch. "I just want to look at it," she said, her voice steady, giving him another chance to do his job, but Caleb doubled down. "Look, we're busy with serious buyers," he said, gesturing toward the couple being offered sparkling water by a salesperson. "If you can't show us you're qualified, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The word qualified hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ava knew what he meant. She didn't look the part, didn't fit the image of wealth he'd decided was worthy of his time. That's when Marcus Tate, the security guard, appeared. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, a former Marine whose stoic expression hid a flicker of unease. Ava caught it, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand hovered over his radio, hesitant. He didn't want to be here, didn't want to play this role, but Caleb's sharp nod left him no choice. "Ma'am, let's go," Marcus said, his voice low but firm, stepping closer. His hand grazed her arm, not quite grabbing but close enough to feel like a threat. "We don't want trouble." Trouble. The word hit Ava like a slap. She'd built this empire to be a place where dreams were sold, where anyone could walk in and feel valued. Yet here she was, in her own dealership, being treated like a criminal for daring to exist. She pulled her arm back, her eyes locking onto Marcus's. "I'll walk myself," she said, her voice sharp enough to make him pause. She turned toward the door, her steps deliberate. but not before glancing at Nia Carter, the young black lawyer who'd entered earlier. Nia, in her tailored blazer and heels, stood at the reception desk, her face a mix of determination and frustration. Chloe was repeating the same script she'd used on Ava. "Our cars start at 50 grand, Chloe said, her tone icy. "Maybe try the used lot in Santa Ana." Nia's shoulders stiffened, but she held her ground, her voice calm. "I'm here to see the Mercedes S-Class," she said, pointing to a car worth twice Ava's Porsche. Chloe's smirk widened, and Caleb, watching from a distance, gave a subtle nod, as if approving the dismissal. Ava's stomach churned. This wasn't just about her. It was a pattern, a system, a culture that judged people by their skin and their clothes before their worth. As Ava reached the glass doors, she paused, her hand on the handle. She could leave now. Let this moment fade. But that wasn't who she was. She turned back, her eyes sweeping the showroom, taking in every detail, the salespeople ignoring Nia, the customers whispering, Caleb's smug grin. Her phone was still recording, capturing the truth in real time. Then, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Caleb leaned toward a young salesperson, whispering, "Stick to the policy. Focus on the ones who look like they can pay." The salesperson nodded, glancing at Nia with a dismissive shake of his head. Ava's heart sank. This wasn't just bad behavior. It was a directive, a deliberate strategy to exclude. She slipped outside to her Chevy Malibu, parked in the lot under the Malibu sun, sitting in the driver's seat. She replayed Caleb's words in her mind. A policy, her dealership, her life's work, was being twisted into something ugly, something that echoed the rejections she'd fought against her whole life. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Sarah Nguyen, her trusted assistant, who'd been with her since the first dealership. "It's worse than we thought. Start the protocol." Sarah's reply was instant. "On it. Stay safe." Ava's fingers trembled with rage. Her dealership, her life's work, was being twisted into something ugly. She texted Sarah, "Keep watching. I'm going in again." Lux Motors was supposed to be different. A place where dreams were universal, where a kid from Oakland could walk in and feel seen. Instead, it was a mirror of the world she'd fought to escape. Then, a new figure caught her eye through the showroom's glass walls. A man in a tailored suit, James Whitaker, stepped inside, his Rolex glinting under the lights. The transformation was instant. Chloe sprang to her feet, her smile warm and genuine. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Lux Motors. Can I get you a coffee?" A salesperson rushed over, offering a handshake and a tour. James asked about the same Porsche Ava had inquired about, and within seconds, keys were in his hand. No questions asked, no ID demanded. Ava's jaw tightened. The double standard was so blatant it was almost cartoonish. Yet it was real, unfolding before her eyes. She glanced at Nia, still standing at the desk, her patience fraying as Chloe brushed her off again. Ava knew Nia's type, someone who'd worked hard, defied odds, only to be judged by the same tired stereotypes. Ava's resolve hardened. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Nia, for every customer who'd been dismissed, for the values she'd poured into her empire. Then came the twist that turned her rage into clarity. As she watched from the car, Ava noticed a young woman lingering near the showroom's entrance, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. It was Sarah Nguyen, her assistant, disguised as a customer in a modest dress, blending into the background. Ava had planted her there days ago, a secret weapon to observe and report. Sarah's presence wasn't just backup, it was confirmation that Ava's test was airtight. Sarah's phone was recording too, capturing every interaction, every slight, from a different angle. Ava smiled, a flicker of triumph breaking through her anger. Caleb and his team had no idea they were being watched from two fronts. Ava's mind raced. She could storm back in now, reveal herself, and end this charade. But she wanted more. She needed to see how deep this rot went, how far Caleb's policy had spread. She texted Sarah again. "Keep watching. I'm going in again." She stepped out of the Chevy, her hoodie still on, and walked back toward the showroom. This time, she'd push harder, ask more questions, force them to show their true colors. The glass doors loomed ahead, reflecting her silhouette. A woman underestimated, but ready to strike. The test wasn't over. It was about to get real. Ava Reynolds pushed through the glass doors of Lux Motors, the cool air of the showroom hitting her like a wave. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers, and the cars, Porsche, Maserati, Aston Martin, stood like silent sentinels of wealth. But Ava's focus was razor-sharp, her pulse steady despite the fire in her chest. She'd heard Caleb Morgan's whispered policy to prioritize customers who looked like they could pay. And it wasn't just a bad habit. It was a deliberate system, a betrayal of everything her empire stood for. Her phone, still recording in her pocket, was her weapon, and Sarah Nguyen, her undercover assistant, was watching from the shadows. Ava was ready to expose the rot. She walked straight to the Porsche 911, its black curves catching the light like a dare. Caleb, leaning against a desk, spotted her immediately. His eyes narrowed, irritation flashing across his face. He thought he'd already dismissed her, sent her packing with his condescending demands for ID and financing proof. But Ava wasn't leaving. Not yet. She ran her hand along the car's sleek hood, her touch deliberate, her gaze locked on Caleb. "Tell me about this one," she said, her voice calm but firm, loud enough to draw attention. A few customers glanced over, sensing the tension. Caleb strode toward her, his polished shoes clicking, his smile a thin veneer over his frustration. "Ma'am, we've been over this," he said, his tone sharp, barely masking his disdain. "This car's for serious buyers. I need to see 3 forms of ID, a bank statement, and pre-approved financing. Now!" His words were a wall, meant to shut her out. But Ava saw the crack in his armor, his need to control, to protect his pristine showroom from someone he'd already judged unworthy. "I'm not buying today," Ava said, her voice steady, almost conversational. "I just want to know about the car. That's your job, right? To tell customers about the cars?" She tilted her head, her eyes challenging him to do what he was paid for. The showroom grew quieter, the hum of conversations fading as heads turned. Chloe Bennett, the receptionist, looked up from her desk, her smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. She sensed something was off, but she didn't know what. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being pushed back, especially not by someone he'd written off as insignificant. "Look," he said, stepping closer, his voice low but dripping with arrogance. "We don't have time for people who can't afford to be here. You're wasting my staff's energy." The words were a slap, meant to humiliate, to drive her out. A nearby customer, a woman in a designer dress, stifled a laugh, and Ava felt the sting, not for herself, but for every person who'd ever been made to feel small in a place like this. She glanced across the room at Nia Carter, the young black lawyer who'd been dismissed earlier. Nia was now speaking to a salesperson, her voice polite but firm as she asked about the Mercedes S-Class. The salesperson, a young man with nervous eyes, kept glancing at Caleb, as if seeking permission to continue. Caleb gave a subtle shake of his head, and the salesperson's demeanor shifted, his responses growing curt, his body language pushing Nia away. Ava's heart sank. This wasn't just about her. It was a machine, grinding down anyone who didn't fit their image of wealth. Then came the moment that turned Ava's anger into resolve. Caleb leaned toward Chloe and muttered, "Make sure she doesn't touch anything. We can't have people like her scaring off real customers." The phrase "people like her" hit Ava like a spark to dry tinder. It wasn't just prejudice, it was policy, embedded in the culture Caleb had built. Ava's phone caught every word, and she knew Sarah, blending into the crowd in her modest dress, was capturing it too. But Ava needed more. She needed Caleb to dig his own grave deeper. "I'd like to speak to someone about the financing options," Ava said, raising her voice slightly, drawing more eyes. Caleb's face reddened. He wasn't just annoyed now, he was furious. "Ma'am, I've had enough," he snapped, his voice carrying across the showroom. "You're disrupting our business. Marcus!" He waved over Marcus Tate, the security guard, who hesitated for a split second before approaching. Marcus's eyes met Ava's, and she saw it again. That flicker of discomfort. The weight of a man caught between orders and conscience. "Escort her out," Caleb ordered, his tone final. Marcus stepped forward, his hand hovering near Ava's arm. "Let's go, ma'am," he said, his voice quieter than before, almost apologetic. Ava didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on Caleb's. "I'm a customer," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I have every right to be here. Why are you treating me like this?" The question hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Customers were watching now, some whispering, others shifting uncomfortably. The showroom's polished facade was cracking. Caleb's smile vanished. "You know why?" he said, his voice low, almost a hiss. "This isn't your place." The words were raw, unfiltered, a confession of his bias laid bare. Ava's heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. She had him. Every word, every gesture, was on her phone, and Sarah's too. But before she could respond, a new figure entered the scene, shifting the dynamic in a way Ava hadn't expected. James Whitaker, the well-dressed tech mogul who'd been treated like royalty earlier, returned from a test drive. He strode in, keys dangling, his Rolex catching the light. Chloe sprang to her feet, her smile bright as she offered him coffee. A salesperson rushed to his side, eager to close the deal. James glanced at Ava, then at Caleb, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone casual but curious. Caleb seized the opportunity to shift focus. "Just handling a situation, sir," he said, his voice suddenly warm, professional. "Nothing to worry about. Let's get you set with that Porsche." The contrast was sickening. Ava watched as Caleb transformed into the perfect salesman for James, while she and Nia were treated like intruders. But James, to his credit, didn't let it slide. "Doesn't seem like nothing," he said, nodding toward Ava. "She's a customer, right? Why is she being escorted out?" His question was innocent, but it was a spark, igniting whispers among the other customers. Caleb's face froze, his confidence faltering for the first time. Ava saw her opening. "I just asked about the Porsche," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But apparently, I need to prove I belong here first." "Why is that?" "Caleb." She used his name deliberately, watching his eyes widen in shock. He hadn't expected her to know it, hadn't expected her to push back so publicly. The showroom was silent now, every eye on Caleb, waiting for his response. He stammered, caught off guard. It's policy," he said, his voice weak. "We verify serious buyers to protect our inventory." The excuse was flimsy, and everyone knew it. Nia, still standing nearby, spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "I was told the same thing," she said. "No one asked him for ID." She nodded toward James, who raised an eyebrow. Looking between Caleb and Ava, Ava's heart raced. This was it. The moment the truth began to unravel, she glanced at Sarah, who gave a subtle nod, her phone still recording. Ava knew she had enough evidence to end careers, but she wasn't done. She wanted Caleb to admit the full extent of his policy, to expose the system he'd built. "So, this policy," she said, her voice calm but piercing. "Does it apply to everyone, or just people who look like me and her?" She gestured toward Nia, her words a challenge, a trap. Caleb's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his hand dropping from his radio. Chloe's smirk was gone, replaced by wide-eyed panic. The customers were no longer whispering. They were staring, some with disgust, others with curiosity. Ava stood tall, her hoodie and jeans a stark contrast to the opulence around her, but her presence commanded the room. She wasn't just a customer anymore. She was a force, and Caleb had no idea how much trouble he was in. The silence in Lux Motors was deafening, the kind that makes your ears ring. Ava Reynolds stood in the center of the showroom, her faded hoodie and worn jeans a quiet rebellion against the polished wealth around her. The Porsche 911 gleamed nearby, but all eyes were on her. Caleb Morgan's face was ashen, his earlier arrogance crumbling under the weight of her words. Nia Carter, the young lawyer, stood firm, her gaze steady, amplifying Ava's challenge. James Whitaker, the tech mogul, watched with a raised eyebrow, his question about the dealership's policy still unanswered. Sarah Nguyen, Ava's undercover assistant, lingered near the edge of the crowd, her phone capturing every second. Ava's own phone, hidden in her pocket, recorded the truth that would soon shatter careers. Caleb opened his mouth, scrambling for a defense. "It's not about that," he stammered, his voice thin. We have to protect our business, you know? We can't let just anyone handle the cars." His words were a desperate grab for control, but they fell flat. The customers, now a silent jury, exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, others outraged. Nia's voice cut through, sharp and clear. "Then why didn't you ask him for ID?" She nodded toward James, who crossed his arms, waiting for an answer. Ava seized the moment. "Exactly," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. "You didn't ask him for anything. No ID, no bank statements, no proof. But me, Nia, we're threats to your inventory?" Her words were a blade, precise and cutting. Caleb's eyes darted to Chloe Bennett, the receptionist, as if she could save him. Chloe shrank behind her desk, her earlier smirk replaced by panic. Marcus Tate, the security guard, stood frozen, his hand no longer near his radio, his face a mask of regret. Ava could have ended it there. Walked away with her evidence and let her team handle the fallout. But this wasn't just about evidence. It was about justice. About dismantling a system that judged people before they could speak. She took a step closer to Caleb, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You said it's policy. Tell me, Caleb, who wrote this policy? Who decided who's serious enough to be here?" The question was a trap, and Caleb knew it. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. Before he could answer, the glass doors swung open, and a new figure stormed in. Liam Chen, the regional manager, burst into the showroom, his tailored suit slightly askew, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Liam was a seasoned executive, used to managing crises across multiple dealerships, but the look on his face was pure dread. He'd gotten Ava's text about initiating Protocol Omega, the nuclear option for her empire, reserved for betrayals so severe they threatened the company's soul. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Ava, and the color drained from his face. "Miss Reynolds," Liam said, his voice trembling with respect and fear. I came as soon as I could. The room froze. Caleb's head snapped up, confusion replacing his panic. Chloe's hands gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. Marcus took a step back, as if retreating from a storm. The customers whispered, the name Reynolds rippling through the crowd like a shockwave. James Whitaker's eyes widened, recognition dawning. Caleb, still clueless, tried to regain control. Wait, what's going on? Who's she? He demanded, pointing at Ava. His voice was shrill, his confidence unraveling. Liam's eyes flicked to him, then back to Ava, his expression a mix of horror and resignation. Caleb, stop, Liam said, his voice low, urgent. But Caleb didn't stop. He couldn't. She's causing a scene, he snapped. She's been disruptive since she walked in. Ava's lips curved into a smile. Not warm, not friendly, but the kind that promised consequences. She reached into her pocket, not for her phone, but for a simple business card. She placed it on the desk between her and Caleb with a soft tap that echoed like thunder. Ava Reynolds, she said, her voice steady, commanding, CEO of Reynolds Automotive Empire. The words landed like a bomb, silencing the showroom. Every conversation stopped. Every breath caught. The weight of her title settled over the room, crushing Caleb's arrogance into dust. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Marcus's shoulders slumped, his face a portrait of regret. The customers stared, some in awe, others in disbelief. James Whitaker let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Well, damn, he muttered, a hint of respect in his voice. Liam stepped forward, his voice shaking. Ms. Reynolds, I had no idea you were here, if I'd known. Ava cut him off, her gaze never leaving Caleb. That's the problem. Liam, she said, her voice like steel. Your respect shouldn't depend on knowing who I am. Every person who walks through these doors deserves the same dignity, the same chance. But you... She turned to Caleb, her eyes burning. You decided I wasn't worth your time. You decided Nia wasn't worth it. Why? Because of how we look? Because of our skin? Caleb's face was a mask of panic, his mouth working soundlessly. I didn't mean, he stammered. But Ava wasn't done. You meant every word, she said. You meant it when you called me a thief. You meant it when you told Marcus to escort me out. And you meant it when you told your staff to focus on real customers. She gestured toward Sarah, who stepped forward, her disguise as a customer shed, her phone now visible. We recorded everything. Caleb, every word, every look, every policy you enforced. The showroom was a graveyard of silence. Caleb's eyes darted to Sarah, then back to Ava. Realization crashing over him. He'd been caught, not just by his boss, but by a trap he'd walked into blindly. Liam's face was grim, his hands clenched. He knew what was coming. Ava turned to him, her voice calm but unyielding. Liam, you oversee this region. How did this happen under your watch? How did a policy like this take root? Liam swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. I failed you, Ms. Reynolds. I should have checked closer. His honesty was raw, but it wasn't enough. Ava's empire wasn't built on excuses. She looked at Naya, who stood with quiet strength, her eyes reflecting the same resolve Ava felt. This isn't just about me, Ava said, addressing the room. It's about her. It's about every customer you've judged, dismissed, humiliated. This stops now. She turned back to Caleb, her voice a quiet storm. Pack your things. You're done. The words were final, a death knell for his career. Caleb's mouth fell open, but no words came. Chloe's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. Marcus looked away, shame etched into his features. Ava's gaze swept the room, landing on each employee. "This isn't over," she said. "We're cleaning house. Today." Ava Reynolds stood in the heart of Lux Motors, her presence a quiet storm that had just torn through the showroom's fragile facade. The marble floors and chandeliers gleamed, but the air was heavy with the weight of her words. Caleb Morgan, the once arrogant manager, stood frozen, his career in ruins after Ava's command to pack his things. Chloe Bennett's tears streaked her flawless makeup, her earlier smugness replaced by dread. Marcus Tate, the security guard, kept his eyes on the floor, his regret palpable. Customers, including James Whitaker and Nia Carter, watched in stunned silence, while Sarah Nguyen, Ava's undercover assistant, stood ready, her phone still in hand. Liam Chen, the regional manager, looked like a man staring into the abyss, knowing his oversight had let this poison fester. Ava's voice broke the silence, steady but fierce. "This dealership was meant to be a place of dreams," she said, her words carrying across the room. "A place where anyone could walk in and feel valued. But you—" Her gaze landed on Chloe, then Marcus. "You turned it into a place of judgment, of exclusion. That ends now." She turned to Liam, her eyes narrowing. "You're staying, but you're on notice. Fix this, or you're next." Liam nodded, his face pale. "Yes, Ms. Reynolds. I'll make it right." His voice was earnest, but Ava wasn't here for promises. She wanted action. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text to her legal team. "Initiate Protocol Omega, full sweep." Protocol Omega was her empire's last resort, a complete overhaul reserved for crises that threatened the core of her values. Within minutes, her team would descend on Lux Motors, auditing every record, every interaction, every hire. Heads would roll, and not just Caleb's. But Ava's focus shifted to Nia Carter, the young lawyer who'd endured the same humiliation Ava had. Nia stood near the Mercedes S-Class, her posture strong despite the ordeal. Ava walked over, her expression softening. "Ms. Carter," she said, her voice warm. "I saw what happened. You didn't deserve that. No one does." Nia's eyes met hers, a mix of surprise and gratitude. "I just wanted to buy a car," Nia said, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. "I worked hard for this." Ava nodded, feeling a pang of recognition. She'd been Nia once, young and ambitious, facing a world quick to judge. "I know," Ava said, "and you're walking out of here with more than a car. That Mercedes? It's yours, at cost, with my personal apology." Nia's eyes widened, but Ava wasn't done. "I'd also like you to join our customer advisory board. Help us make sure this never happens again." Nia hesitated, then nodded, a spark of resolve in her eyes. "I'm in," she said. Ava turned back to the room, addressing everyone, employees, customers, even the air itself. "This isn't just about firing a few bad apples," she said. "It's about rebuilding, starting today. Every employee here will undergo mandatory training, not a checkbox, but real education on respect, on dignity. We're rewriting our hiring process to value character over appearance, and we're installing a system to monitor every customer interaction, so no one ever feels invisible again." Her words were a vow, a blueprint for a new Lux Motors. She looked at Sarah, who stepped forward, her role as Ava's secret weapon now clear. "Sarah's been with me since day one," Ava said. "She'll oversee the transition. Anyone who can't meet our standards? The door's open." The employees exchanged nervous glances, the weight of accountability settling over them. Ava's gaze lingered on Chloe, whose tears had stopped, replaced by a dawning realization of her actions. "You thought you were just doing your job," Ava said, her voice firm but not cruel. But your job is to serve, not to judge. Learn from this, or you won't last in any industry. Chloe nodded, her face flushed with shame, as Ava stepped toward the glass doors, her hoodie still a symbol of her test. She felt the fire in her chest ease, replaced by purpose. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Lux Motors would rise from this, stronger, truer to her vision. And Caleb, Chloe, Marcus, they'd learned that actions had consequences, that prejudice carried a cost. Ava Reynolds stepped out of Lux Motors into the Malibu sunlight, the weight of the morning's events settling into her bones. The glass doors closed behind her, muffling the murmurs of the showroom where her words still echoed. Inside. Nia Carter was finalizing paperwork for her Mercedes. A symbol of justice served. Sarah Nguyen was already coordinating with Ava's legal team, launching Protocol Omega to scrub the dealership clean of its toxic culture. Liam Chen, chastened but determined, was gathering the remaining staff for an emergency meeting. But for Ava, this moment wasn't about the chaos she'd left behind. It was about the future she was building, a legacy forged from the ashes of betrayal. She slid into her Chevy Malibu, the unassuming car that had been her disguise, and let out a long breath. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, not from anger but from a quiet resolve. She'd come to Lux Motors expecting to find flaws, maybe a few rude employees, but what she'd uncovered was a wound in the heart of her empire. Caleb Morgan's policy of prioritizing real customers wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror of the world she'd fought to change, a world that judged her by her skin, her clothes, her existence. Yet, standing in that showroom, revealing her identity as CEO, she'd turned that mirror back on them, forcing them to see their own failures. Ava's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Team's on site. Audit starts in an hour. Nia's on board for the advisory. Ava smiled, a flicker of pride cutting through the weight of the day. Nia wasn't just a customer, she was a partner now, her voice a vital part of the dealership's redemption. Ava thought of Nia's quiet strength, the way she'd held her ground against Chloe's dismissal, and saw a reflection of her younger self, the girl from Oakland who'd refused to be invisible. This was why she'd fought, why she'd built Reynolds' automotive empire, to open doors, not close them. She drove along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean sparkling to her left, and let her mind drift to the bigger picture. Lux Motors was one dealership, but her empire spanned 15. If this could happen in Malibu, it could happen anywhere. Protocol Omega wasn't just a cleanup. It was a mandate for every location. Mandatory training would start next week, led by experts in equity and inclusion. Not some half-hearted seminar, but a deep dive into dismantling bias. New hiring practices would prioritize empathy and integrity, with interviews designed to test how candidates treated people, not just how they looked, and a transparent feedback system would let customers report their experiences, ensuring no one ever felt dismissed again. But Ava knew change wasn't just about policies. It was about hearts. She thought of Chloe, her tears a mix of fear and shame, and Marcus, his regret etched into every line of his face. They'd lost their jobs, their reputations. But Ava hoped they'd gain something too, a lesson that prejudice wasn't just wrong. It was costly. Caleb, with his arrogance shattered, would carry this failure for years, a cautionary tale in the industry. Yet Ava didn't revel in their downfall. Her fight wasn't against them. It was against the system they'd upheld, the same system that had tried to break her decades ago. She pulled over at a scenic lookout, the ocean stretching endless before her. In the quiet, she thought of her uncle's auto shop in Oakland, where she'd first learned to love cars, not just as machines, but as dreams. He'd told her, judge people by their heart. Ava, not their wallet. Those words had guided her empire, and now they'd guide its rebirth. Lux Motors would become a model, a place where anyone, rich or poor, black or white, could walk in and feel seen. Ava's phone buzzed again. A news alert. CEO goes undercover, exposes discrimination at luxury dealership. The story was breaking, and she knew the world would be watching. But she wasn't afraid. This wasn't just her story. It was Nia's, Sarah's, every customer who'd been judged. It was a call to every business, every leader, to look in the mirror and ask, who are we serving, and who are we leaving behind? She started the car, the Chevy's engine humming softly. Lux Motors was the beginning, not the end. Ava Reynolds had built an empire, but her true legacy was this: a world where character outshone appearance, where justice wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. If Ava Reynolds' story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do to fight for justice like Ava? Hit subscribe, share this video, and spread the message. Judge people by their character, not their appearance. Take action today.